Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Preventing Business Email Compromise webinar. This is the third webinar in our Identify, Mitigate, and Recover series. We are excited to be here today to present an introduction to understanding business email compromise. So with that, let's get started. Business email attacks, also known as business email compromise or BEC, or also referred to as email account compromise, EAC, is the single most costly form of crime affecting businesses, governments, and individuals in the United States as well as worldwide. The primary goal of this training today is to enable you to protect yourself and your organization from business email compromise by understanding what makes individuals and organizations are vulnerable to these types of attacks. In this overview, we'll do a few things. We'll define BEC attacks and look at the evolution of these crimes and their global impact. We'll learn to identify, prevent, and mitigate the effects of an attack, including the processes to recover losses. We'll then spend the second half of the course analyzing the impacts of BEC by reviewing 3 real-world case studies featuring a Shark Tank celebrity, 2 local governments in Florida, and a global auto parts supplier. Finally, we'll quiz your learning again with a closing knowledge check. The foundation of business email compromise, which also makes it so common, is social engineering. This is the act of deceiving someone into sharing information or taking action, usually through technology. Good people fall prey to BEC because of the strength of this social engineering. The tactics are designed to take advantage of a target victim's natural tendencies and emotional reactions to build trust and provide the information needed by the attacker, including processes and responsibilities of the target's typical work duties. This graphic illustrates the foundations of a business email attack. The ultimate goal of a BEC scam is to request and receive fraudulent payments or access to employee payroll or W-2 information and other personally identifiable information, or PII, that will enable the attacker to target the identified individuals or their organizations. The impact of business email compromise reaches far and wide. BEC is the most lucrative of all cybercrimes tracked by the FBI because of the high success rate of completed fraudulent transactions. Again, this goes to show social engineering is very, very powerful and very effective. BEC victims are individuals, small businesses, governments, large and multinational corporations, and every sort of business in between. And BEC attacks do not discriminate. Criminal actors target all sectors and all markets. This is a global problem that is quickly multiplying. Between May of 2018 and July of 2019, there was a 100% increase in identified global exposed losses. The FBI's Crime Complaint Center, also known as IC3, their annual report shows that BEC was responsible for almost half of the total financial losses incurred through all forms of cybercrime. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center has tracked the evolution of this type of scam over the past decade, since this type of fraud has become very prevalent. Back in 2013, scams typically began with hacking or spoofing of CEO or CFO's email accounts with requests for wire payments. Since then, the scam has evolved to include personal email attacks, vendor emails, spoofed lawyer email accounts, requests for W-2 information, the targeting of the real estate sector, and fraudulent gift card requests. In 2019, more and more BEC complaints were related to the diversion of payroll funds. In this type of scam, the HR or payroll department receives a fraudulent email from an employee requesting to update their direct deposit information. However, the new account generally routes to a prepaid card account. BEC exploits financial process controls that are designed to safeguard against fraud. One example of a control is the authentication of the recipient's identity via another communication channel, either phone, which I have a personal example of later, or face-to-face. When controls are not in place, criminal actors can more easily use social engineering tactics to then collect payments. However, businesses and organizations can prevent these attacks by learning to recognize these top 5 risk factors and indicators of a BEC scam. Number 1 is businesses working with a foreign supplier. This type of BEC is attempted when a long-standing relationship with a supplier is exploited through a request to wire funds for an invoice payment to an alternate fraudulent account. We'll see an example of this type of fraud in a case study later on in this course. A second red flag is a business executive receiving or initiating a request for a wire transfer. In this case, a CEO, CFO, or other executive's email account is spoofed or hacked to then request that an employee wire money to a fraudulent account. The strength of social engineering, again, here lies in the fact that employees are generally loyal to the requests of authority figures within the organization. A third indicator is business contacts receiving fraudulent correspondence through compromised email. This is where the personal email account of an employee is hacked and the criminal actor sends requests for invoice payments to the hacker's own bank account. Fourth is business executives and attorney impersonation. This form of fraud is another glaring example of how social engineering is based on trust in authority. Fraudsters identify themselves as lawyers or representatives of law firms and request PII or financial information from the victim. And the fifth is data theft. Many times, fraudulent requests are sent from business executives' compromised email to departments responsible for W-2s or maintaining PII, such as human resources, accounts payable and receivable, or an internal audit. Now that we have a basic understanding of what business email compromises are, we'd like to take a minute and do a quick survey of how this type of attack may have impacted those of you here on the webinar. So we're going to put up a few polling polls. What we'd like to do is select your responses on the screen. All responses are anonymous. We just want to get a feel for who's been affected. So as a few of the questions we'd like to hear from you on are, have you heard of these types of attacks in the past? And it appears a large number of you have. Second, we'd like to know, has your organization been targeted that you know of? There we go. Looks like again a lot of folks saying yes, that their organization has been targeted. Maybe about 2/3 respondents, roughly. Interesting. So we're seeing again prevalence. Everybody's heard of the attacks, and it sounds like many have been affected in terms of their organization. Now, third, we'd like to know, have you ever personally been targeted by an attack like this? And this could be via your organization or at home. Okay, we're seeing a few more have not been targeted than have, which is a good thing, personally. but not a huge disparity between the two. Almost evenly split. And then last but not least, do you know somebody who has been targeted? Wow. Looks like we have a lot of folks who have. So if it hasn't happened to themselves or the organization, certainly know somebody who has been targeted. Large majority of folks know who's been targeted. Again, given the predominance of these types of attacks, not extremely surprising. So with that, we have the poll closed. I was just going into another example, personal story of banking, where I had been the victim of a social engineering attack. But again, example of how creative folks can be on this. And my bank is a very reputable bank, and used by many folks who are former or current military. And the way the attack occurred was the use of social engineering and identification confirmation via phone, which we had discussed earlier. And to make a long story short, essentially, I'd gotten a text message as an alert that there was potential fraudulent activity on my card, which I expect because I get those text messages all the time, or not all the time, but I'm used to getting them from my bank. They seem legit because that's how the process works. I then received a phone call from my bank, in quotations, asking if I had conducted a large purchase at a local Target, which I said I had not. I even texted my wife, said, "Hey, did you spend $800 at Target?" She said, "No, I did not." So I said, "Yes, please flag it as fraud. Let's shut down the card." They said, "Great." We went through the exact script that's happened to me 2 or 3 times before, and the individual followed the same exact script that my bank uses. And we went to shut down the card. He got my information to send me a new card. Again, it's just exactly the way the process should go. However, they lucked out, and there was a kind of a perfect storm of events. They had asked me for my phone PIN, and their shot in the dark was the hope that my phone PIN to confirm my identity via phone would be the same PIN that I would use, stupid me, I know, that's actually on my debit card, which they somehow were able to hack and get the numbers from. So they lucked out there. I was also very distracted at the time because completely separate from that going on, there were some personal things going on literally that morning that were very stressful, got me distracted, off my game, and they had successfully were able to withdraw close to $1,000 from my savings account before the legitimate bank caught it. And the way it was caught was I had to hang up because the person was taking a really long time to give me my information for my card. I called my bank back with the known phone number that I would normally call. I gave them the reference number that I was given to get the new debit card, and they had no idea what I was talking about. At that point, obviously, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I said, "Uh-oh, we have a problem." And as I was on the phone with my legitimate bank representative, she saw money being withdrawn from my bank account in another part of the state. So again, a very, as it turns out, a very sophisticated social engineering attack to get money from folks' account. The attackers knew the script that the bank used when calling their clients to report potential fraudulent activity. So that combined with the fact that through a hack they were able to get people's debit card numbers, and then figured out a creative way to try and get PIN numbers, all as part of that perfect storm, worked. So again, as somebody who I thought I'd never be a victim of an attack like that, it happens to all of us, and it shows the complexity and the ingenuity of criminals as they get this information. All right, moving on to the next slide. So the best defense against BEC attacks is to be prepared and understand mitigation strategies to ensure a quick response and recovery. Let's highlight a few top strategies that companies and organizations should implement. Regularly scheduled awareness training is a key measure of prevention. These trainings prepare employees to identify potential fraud schemes, hardening the organization against social engineering attempts. Implement IT and financial security processes, including two-step verification and multi-factor authentication, are extraordinarily effective and important in helping to mitigate these types of attacks. It's also really helpful to practice random tests with fake phishing emails and then report those results back to the employees. So it's done in a benign, gentle reminder way to not click on potential fake emails. If a financial transaction is requested, hold customer requests for international wire transfers for an additional period of time to verify the legitimacy of the request and confirm that all parties involved are authentic. Be careful what you post to social media and to company websites, especially job duties and descriptions, hierarchical information, and out-of-office details that may help threat actors target departments and individuals within your organization. Businesses with an increased awareness and understanding of email scams are more likely to recognize when they have been targeted by fraudsters and are therefore more likely to avoid falling victim and sending fraudulent payments. If you find that your organization has fallen victim to an attack, the following are recommended steps to take in order to respond to and resolve the ramifications of the attack as efficiently as possible. Most importantly, organizations should develop and practice a response action plan and a guide that can be followed by the organization as a central point of reference in the event of an attack. Additional best practices in prevention and mitigation are clearly defining the roles and responsibilities during the actual response and recovery process so that everybody knows their role and can conduct themselves in an efficient way as possible. Also, those unsolicited emails that spam, the potential phishing, those should be immediately reported to folks in whether IT or cybersecurity so that they are aware of potential attacks. Do not open the spam emails or click on the links, open attachments. Again, back to training towards phishing with the employees. It can help reinforce that good practice and the good cyber hygiene of not opening and not clicking on those things. Speed and attention to detail is the best response for reporting a business email attack. When you're contacting law enforcement or filing a complaint with IC3, it's important to identify your incident as that type of attack, as a BC attack, and provide as much detail as possible, including information listed in the bullets here. The name of the originating business, financial institution, and accounting number, who the beneficiary is to be, their financial information and accounting numbers, the correspondent bank, dates and the amounts transferred, and the email addresses of our IP of the fraudulent email. As much of that information as can be gathered to report back, then better off in trying to find that. So now that we've covered the basics of how to identify, mitigate, and respond to BEC, we'll apply these principles over the second half of this webinar to highlight some real-life scenarios and better understand how easily and quickly a company or organization or an individual like me can fall for one of these attacks. So our first case study involves Barbara Corcoran, who you all may know as a successful entrepreneur and a member of NBC's hit show, The Shark Tank. She was a recent victim of an email scamming attack, which made the news a couple months ago, and you may have heard about. A cyber criminal pretending to be her assistant emailed a $400,000 invoice to Corcoran's bookkeeper for renovation costs. The request was not initially suspicious because Barbara is in the business of investing in real estate, and renovation expenses are obviously to be expected. So the bookkeeper, believing the request to be legitimate, proceeded to wire the money to the fraudulent account as requested. The scammer imitated her email or her assistant's email address and misspelled it by changing one character in the domain portion of the email. This ports the email to a totally different domain, fully controlled by the attacker. The mistake wasn't caught until the bookkeeper emailed the assistant's correct email address for a follow-up confirmation. Email phishing, which could also be referred to as vishing or smishing or farming, is often used in conjunction with a spoofed email. Phishing is the act of sending an email falsely claiming to be an established, legitimate business to deceive the unsuspecting recipient into divulging that personal or sensitive information such as financial information, credit card numbers, passwords, after directing the user to visit a specified website. The website, however, is not genuine and is only set up as an attempt to steal the user's information. Human awareness and employee training are the only defenses against this type of an attack. Also, in Barbara's situation, the invoice should have some clues to the fraudulent activity. Employees should be trained on how to identify those clues. For example, the bookkeeper receiving the initial invoice could have been taught to reach out to the listed sender, separate from the original message, and then engage with the legitimate bank to confirm the invoice request. Fortunately, due to the stoppage of the transfer of funds and recovery of the full amount, the $400,000, the financial impact was minimal. However, there is a greater impact here to the reputation and credibility of the recipient and the affected staff, and those folks being Barbara Corcoran herself, the bookkeeper, and her assistant. While retroactive, due diligence and best practice actions of reviewing communications closely and confirming communications with the claimed sender legitimate were taken to ultimately protect the victim's reputation. There are several retroactive actions that can be taken to reduce future email phishing. These include blocking investigating the origin of the sender's email, investigate the banking information provided to receive the wired money, confirm the location of the bank account expected to receive the funds, work with banking institutions to freeze the initiated wire amount, and block money from being deposited into the sender's account. Awareness training can safeguard transactions and reduce the potential of future attacks, and is even more effective in conjunction with enforced best practices for email security, including patch management and maintaining software and systems to flag and restrict those suspicious messages. Now on to our second case study. Let's examine how two BEC attacks targeted municipalities just miles apart in Florida, resulting in the theft of nearly combined $900,000 in taxpayer funds. In December of 2018, a county in Florida was victim to a business email attack scheme resulting in the theft of $184,000. The funds were paid to a foreign attacker posing as a legitimate contractor working for the county. Then in a similar fashion, the following June, a city in that same Florida county was victim to a criminal business attack, a criminal business email attack, resulting in the theft of $700,000. Funds were paid to a fake bank account. The attacker posed as a representative from a legitimate construction company doing infrastructure work in a major city. Publicly available information self-disclosed on social media can make companies vulnerable to these types of attacks. For example, scammers can use LinkedIn to identify targets and pose as a vendor and submit a request for payment for services rendered. In the Florida County case, the solicitation was framed as a request for payment for services rendered, and it was likely posed to a county employee with access to government accounts. The imperative to reconcile accounts in a timely manner, as well as other accounting best practices, would likely compel such employees to settle such requests, especially when these requests seem to originate from actual vendors. Again, social engineering has its foundations in social trust. Another key vulnerability at play here is the implicit trust in authority figures. In the Florida County case, the email account of a vice president at the contracting firm was spoofed, which resulted in the request for a funds transfer to a fraudster-controlled account to pay an outstanding invoice. According to the FBI, this type of business email compromise regularly targets businesses and individuals performing wire transfer payments. In 2018, victims in Florida lost nearly $83 million to this type of a scam, an astonishing number. Both of these incidents resulted in theft of taxpayer funds that could have been used for essential government programming. It's important to note that cybersecurity attacks have a lasting impact beyond just the theft of the funds. They also erode the goodwill and confidence in local, state, and federal government. The Florida city realized that the attack had occurred on August 1st, 2 months later, when the construction company followed up with the city regarding payment for these services. The city believed it had already paid for the services, but the payment obviously went to a fraudster account instead. To take it a step further, if the construction company had not reached out in August to inquire for the payment, the city would have never known that the money was stolen, and the criminal actors could have made subsequent requests for payment. In efforts to mitigate future crimes, the county and city both conducted reviews to improve internal processes and put safeguards in place. In addition to that, the vendors who were impersonated provided cybersecurity training to their employees to help them identify and mitigate the risks of these types of attacks. According to county officials, there was no data or security breach, nor was the crime aimed at the clerk of courts or the county's computer system. The scammers didn't gain access to email accounts or networks. There was no ransomware or malware attacks that had occurred, which may precede BEC attacks by making the user's system vulnerable to attackers looking for information to help them facilitate the attack. However, the potential for damage to any of the infrastructure mentioned is present with business email attacks, especially to government entities and large corporations that provide a high degree of public transparency into their methods of conducting business. Scammers have used business email compromise tactics even against well-established multinational corporations where the potential for loss is in the tens of millions or more. In this final case study, a major supplier of Toyota auto parts experienced a BEC attack defrauding the company of just over $37 million. An employee of the parts supplier received fraudulent payment instructions by email to send 4 billion yen, which is about 37 million US dollars, to a third party via an EFT, an electronic funds transfer, which they did. When the target is a massive corporation, the attacks tend to be more sophisticated than a cursory LinkedIn or social media search for employees who manage financial accounts. Malware is often involved when the cybercriminal successfully installing the malware before the BEC attack and then phishing an employee and snooping on email messages. Attack emails are sent from legitimate corporate email accounts, which make them much more believable. A skillful attacker might do months or even years of reconnaissance to learn the victim's communication habits. Generally, the attacker will strike when a large transfer of funds is discussed via email. For example, large real estate transactions or vendor payments for services rendered. Even in these more sophisticated attacks, the underlying vulnerability in BEC attacks are the human links of the process chain. The mitigation steps available are 1, further security awareness for personnel, and 2, process controls to confirm funds transfer via phone or in person before processing. The company became aware that the transfer instructions were fraudulent shortly after the leakage. Recognizing the high possibility of criminal activity, the company immediately organized a legal counsel, then reported the loss to local investigating authorities. A theft this large can create ripple effects for future operations. A press release issued by Toyota noted that the incident may require the company to adjust its March 2020 financial projections. So this concludes the case study portion of this webinar. We will finish up today by walking through a knowledge check, reviewing some of the core concepts and takeaways from this course. So we are going to cover 10 questions. When the question is read, you'll see polling pods up. Go ahead and note your answer in the polling pod, and after a few moments, I'll reveal the correct answer. Starting with question number 1. True or false? Business email attacks are the most lucrative of cybercrimes that are tracked by the FBI. Looks like most folks see this to be true. A lot of responses on that. And the answer is yes, true. This is most lucrative due to the high success rate of the completed fraud transactions. Next question, the foundation of business email compromise is social engineering, phishing data, social structure compromise, a lot of folks are thinking social engineering. We got a handful of folks that think phishing data. Nobody's going for social structure compromise. It looks like we have most respondents in. The answer is social engineering. This works because, again, it exploits a victim's natural tendencies and emotional reactions and trust in authority. So which business email compromise risk factor is described below? The personal email account of an employee is hacked. This account may be used for both personal and business communications. Requests for invoice payments to fraudster-controlled bank accounts are sent from this employee's personal email to multiple vendors identified from this employee's contact list. Which of those three does this describe? Business contacts receiving fraudulent correspondence through email, business working with a foreign supplier, or business executive and attorney impersonation. Looks like we have a lot of folks thinking it's A. Appearing as though most folks have chimed in. That is correct. This is contacts receiving fraudulent correspondence through that compromised email, revealing contact information and other personal details on social media, and again on websites can give those criminal actors the information that they need to attack through both personal and corporate email. Okay, next question. What should you do in the event of a BEC attack? Should you not open the spam email or click on those links? Immediately report and delete the unsolicited email? Look to your company's leadership and the response guide for instructions on what to do, or all of the above? A lot of folks are leaning towards doing all of that. A lot of respondents in. Some folks, handful of folks there on do not open the spam. And for this one, it is all of the above. Although I'm proud of you who said do not open the spam, because that's important. But in actuality, it's all of these things that help isolate the incident, protect your company's information, and makes your organization more secure against future BEC threats. Great. Okay, moving on to our next question. Which of the following sectors is most likely to be targeted by business email compromise attack? Healthcare, retail, financial, or all of them? Which is more likely or most likely? A lot of folks think all. We have a fair number that are in financial. Looks like I have most respondents in. People are skipping ahead to the next question. Overachievers. So for this question, the answer is all of the above. Basically, BEC can affect anyone, and the victims range from small businesses up to large corporations with no specific sector targeted more than another across the board. Next question, true or false? Identified global losses due to BEC doubled from 2018 to 2019. Looks like it's unanimous that almost everybody agrees that that's true. And the answer on that is yes, it is true. From May of 2018 to July of 2019, as we discussed early on in the webinar, I saw a 100% increase in identified global exposed losses. Okay, moving on to the next question. Which of the following is a potential indicator of a BEC attack? Slow network connection, a request for Bitcoin in exchange for encrypted data, an unexpected request for wire transfer of funds to a known vendor, corporate website is hacked and vandalized with inappropriate images. It's like a lot of folks are chiming in on 30. On C. Looks like most folks have recorded their answer, and most of you are correct. These attacks are focused on manipulation in order to steal money. The focus is not necessarily hacking, defacing, or encryption. Okay, our next question. Blank is the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. And excellent. I think this one was a layup. Correct answer is social engineering. This endeavor is fundamental to business email compromise, and thus the awareness regarding a potential attacker's methods are just as critical to successful prevention. Next question. Which of the following are best practices in the prevention of BEC? You may choose more than one. Practicing those random employee testing events, creating a variety of slightly different names to confuse would-be attackers, implementing IT and financial security processes, including two-step verification and multi-factor authentication. And it looks like okay, good. What I'm not seeing, which I like to see, is that nobody went for creating the slightly different domain names. So the answers here are practicing those random employee tests and implementing IT and financial security processes, including the two-step verification and MFA. So creating different domain names would actually be counter to effective prevention, as it would add to the confusion an attacker may create by using slightly altered fraudulent email addresses. So it'd be more confusing to your employees to be able to spot one of those slightly randomized domain names. Excellent. Okay, last but not least, when reporting a BEC event to law enforcement, it's recommended to open the links provided in the email in order to provide, again, as much detail as possible to the investigating authorities. Is that true or false? And everybody agrees that is false. Nobody bit on that trick there to provide information. Correct, that is false. It's important to not open any links or attachment in potentially fraudulent emails, as we know that may contain malware or take you to dangerous sites. So just follow the specific directions of the investigators before taking any action on your own. Okay, so in closing, let's remember that BEC has been continually evolving and can impact everyone. In order to avoid being the next statistic, here are a few key takeaways from today's presentation. Conduct due diligence on any emails that request PII, financial information, or financial transfers, especially if those emails have any level of urgency to them. Next is to practice good cyber hygiene, as always. This means developing regularly scheduled awareness training for employees, implementing IT and financial security processes, including two-step verification and multi-factor authentication. Practice random employee testing events with fake phishing emails. Take care posting on social media and websites, especially job duties and descriptions, hierarchical, chain of command hierarchical information, and the out-of-office details. And flag or acquire all company domains that are slightly different than the actual company domain, and create intrusion detection system rules that flag emails with extensions that are similar to the company email. And last but not least, contact law enforcement with any information you can glean from the email without, I repeat, without clicking on those links or those attachments. So this concludes the IMR 103 webinar, Preventing Business Email Compromise. We hope you've enjoyed the webinar and come away with some knowledge that helps you better protect yourself and your organization from these types of attacks. If you'd like to learn more, we encourage you to visit the resources listed below here. First is the Internet Crime Complaint Center. Mission of this center is to provide the public with a reliable and convenient reporting mechanism to submit information to the FBI about suspected Internet-facilitated criminal activity and to develop effective alliances with law enforcement and industry partners. There's also information through Fraud Magazine, as well as a good article from AARP on how to spot business email